Hi everyone. Today I have Michael Young. Now Michael is ex-CTO of Hutchinson Telecoms and is a real expert in the area of customer experience management. Michael at the moment is running his own consultancy, doing global work in customer experience, and I'm very pleased to have him discussing where the market is today and his thoughts. Michael, before I begin, just give a little intro to yourself, please, and then we'll get into your thoughts on customer experience. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen. Look, I've got a deep background in technology, so really for the last 20 or 30 years have filled global roles primarily around technology, but a number of years ago, I think a very forward-thinking chief executive in Hutchinson Telecoms combined both the CTO role and the customer service role and handed that across to me, which was quite a surprise and also quite challenging. But I think what he could see coming in years to come was that the combination of both of those, we might end up with a better result for the customer. And that's where this real experience interest came from, with a basis of technology.
Okay, and because that's fairly unusual, I think. In my opinion, and what I've seen is most of the time, they're fairly siloed, that customer care and technology side of the organization. Have you found that in your previous work?
They definitely are, and because I think in a telco, primarily a lot of the issues that customer service deal with stem from the network or the product that the network's using. What the chief executive saw, he thought this would be a shortcut to resolving the issues, that it would actually break down those barriers by having a single organisation, and I think he was right. You know, it took a lot of work and a lot of effort to get both groups working as a single group and changing the group culturally. Yes. But I think it was probably fairly advanced thinking on his behalf.
Okay, because that issue of culture and how you bridge the silos is so important in customer experience, making the organization ready. How did you do that? What was the key learnings from your effort?
I think we started with the people. If you looked at the customer service group and looked at the technology group, the brains think differently. There's no doubt about that. But being open to learning on both sides and being open to both sides understanding what the challenges were for each other, we came up with, I think, a very interesting outcome in terms of how we were actually going to service the customers. Now, at that point, we were stopping short of calling it customer experience the way that we would describe it today, because it wasn't. It was more about making sure that we could get early intervention or proactive resolution on the issues that the customers were actually having. So we just combined the teams. We broke down the barriers and we ended up really with collective accountabilities, joint accountabilities, a little bit like a number of us would say today between a CTO and a CMO.
So when you say combine the teams, were they literally one team, or was it more about creating a steering committee and getting people sharing data and talking to each other? How did that work?
No, we had one team. So reporting through to me at that point, we had both the customer service as well as the technology groups all sitting around the same table. Yes. And then it folded down from there. And we invested in the areas that we needed to invest in. So if customer service were getting feedback from customers that there were these 2, 3, 4, 5 issues, that would really end up as a team resolution. It wouldn't be handed across. I mean, technology in the traditional sense used to go, well, you know, we're not sure about that because we want to go and build more towers. It never came to that because there was a collective accountability and collective measures on actually resolving those issues. And, you know, that's the way to break it down. The culture being, you know, this is the way we behave around here. We're going to behave like this collectively. Yes. And the end goal being the customer service, which would lead to a better customer experience. Yes. And I think, again, over a period of time, we managed to do that. So not always successfully, of course, but mostly.
What was the... how did you build that culture? So it's one team. They saw themselves as one team, but you so rightly said their mindsets are so different. So how did you get them aligned in their behaviors to talk to vastly different mindsets, if you like? What sort of key things did you do?
I think understand the differences to start with, and that's no different than what I'd say about when we're looking at customers and customer experience. So if we understand the differences and then we really listen to understand rather than listening to respond, then we learn. So you go in with an open mind, no preconceived ideas or notions, and you'll learn from each other. And that's one way of breaking down those barriers. Very similar to what we see with customer experience. You know, there's a lot of things today that frustrate me about the way that people are approaching customer experience in organizations and consultancies and companies, etc. And a lot of that is, I think, because people are going in with preconceived notions as to how exactly it should be based on their view of the world.
So let's go on your frustrations. Do you want to highlight some of those a little bit in more depth, how you see the frustrations and how you see customer experience evolving?
Yeah, I think what I've learned, Stephen, even since the time we worked together a few years back, I've learned constantly to keep an open mind, and I've had to challenge my own thinking and alter and change it. I think if you looked at some of the things I might have said or written 4 or 5 years ago, it would have been so much more NPS-centric than it is today. And where I am today is very much it's a cocktail of measures. It's a cocktail of understandings. And it really has to be suited to the types of customers and the type of organisation that you're actually either working for or working into. And I'll go back to, probably just a couple of little stories to illustrate it. When I first left college, I had the grand job of being a cocktail barman. Now, that was a lot of fun, but one thing I did learn from that is it's not the product and it's not the service. It's actually a combination of everything that you're doing. Yes. And in fact, the customer's experience in that bar is also going to be influenced by how they walk into that bar. So they're going to bring something to that experience that you've got no control over. So as a barman, if the customer walked in and they were in a great mood, and you mixed them a great cocktail and you had a fantastic conversation with them and it was in and out, they would generally leave thinking, hey, that was a pretty good evening, I've had a good time. But if they walked in a bad mood, something had happened, something wasn't quite right, and you approached them the same way you would, and that when you thought they were in a great mood, they would walk out with a very different experience. So being a cocktail barman, I think it was a great learning because I could never work out why I wasn't getting as many tips as the other barman. Yeah. And I learned very quickly that I could make the best product in the bar. I could put out the best cocktail. It could be pristine. It could be perfect compared to what anyone else is putting out. But if I didn't put an experience behind that in the way that I approached the customer, either listening, understanding what they'd been through in their day, what they were really looking for, it really didn't guarantee a great experience at all. All it guaranteed was there was a product there that had been made perfectly. And what I see today is a lot of organisations doing the same thing. They focus on individual areas, or they think they're focusing on the right areas, and they forget about, actually, you know what, the customer's going to bring something to this. They're going to bring something to the party. So there are things that are going to be outside of your control as well. Yes. I've been working, I did a consultancy last year for a company. I was asked to come in and do a review of their technology organisation, and the culture around that technology organisation as well. And I thought I'd put a couple of things to the test. I put into play a way of interviewing the staff to understand what was actually going on. I interviewed about 70 people one-on-one, and I thought I'd try a few things. So I started to record them with metrics. So, tell me how satisfied you are on a scale of 1 to 10 in terms of what you're receiving from your technology team. At the same time, I'd also ask them to tell me some stories. So what's your experience of the technology group and your experience of technology in this organisation? What would you tell me? And I'd record the stories as well. And then I'd take it to the extreme with a couple of very carefully worded questions that were more NPS orientated. And what I would see that many, many times, the stories that I was hearing were not matching the numbers. So the numbers might be a 6 or a 7, but the story would be quite telling in that actually they weren't getting what they needed to be able to do their job. Yes. And I did this, like I said, over 60 or 70 interviews. And when I stood before the board that asked for recommendations, I told them stories. And I opened up by saying, look, about technology in this organisation. Not one. And it was quite confronting. Now, when I showed them the numbers, they'd rate satisfaction with the internal technology about 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10. That's nowhere near as confronting. And that certainly didn't get people sitting up taking notice. But when we told the stories, it did. it was quite compelling. And that, more than anything, drove them to start thinking about adopting the recommendations. But my point was there was a disconnect between what was getting told and what was getting measured in terms of numerically. Okay. And again, that was a really good learning of, well, how do we move this forward? How do we actually get the solution in place that we need to get in place? And it came back to a lot of the storytelling. So that was quite an eye-opener for me. Yes. In terms of, okay, well, that's a good test. You know, we know that storytelling helps, and as those stories start changing to positive stories, we'll know that we've actually made an advance here. And look, I think also in terms of customer experience today, you know, the really smart designers around the experience a customer can have with them, they put options in the customer's hands. I've seen that time and again. It might not guarantee anything, but it does engage the customer in the result.
Yes.
As we both know as people, the more that we're involved in the decision-making of what we're about to do, then the more likely we are to try and get a better outcome for ourselves. We've actually got some buy-in into that. And I've started to see that with a number of smart organisations that are really starting to engage the customer more with Yes. a bit of flexibility in the outcome that actually gets the customer bound into the result as well.
Cool. So what I'm hearing then is stories isn't really the measure people should go for. Is that what you're saying? They should move away from NPS and start looking more, maybe more qualitatively in their measurements?
I think it's a combination, Stephen. Actually, I think it's a combination. And what I would say, just for my own opinion, would say that there's a combination of things that we would use. That it's not one size fits all. And in many cases, we really have to fit what the organisation or the customer will respond to. And here's a classic. There's another organisation that I spoke to that had a very young population as employees. So I used emojis.
Yes.
I brought emojis into play because I thought actually they'll respond to that, and they did. They found it a bit of fun. It was a bit interesting. So we'll just rate it, pick out some emojis. Let's just see how we go with emoticons or emojis, and let's get feedback that way. And it resonated with them. And not only did they enjoy it, but actually they were quite honest about their feedback then, because I felt that audience wasn't going to respond to a 0 to 10. It made no sense to them. There's nothing in their lives that they measure as a 0 to 10 at all. And as we've discussed before, you know, you don't come out of a movie and go, well, that was a 3 out of 10, or that was a 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
You might walk out of the movie saying, you know, there was one scene where I just laughed myself stupid, so that made it worthwhile. But outside of that, it wasn't a great movie as a classic. So I'm not advocating not using NPS, but where I've seen organisations that say that is the single metric that we're going to march behind, I want to pull my hair out. I really do, because there are so many other measures and understandings that are needed that you just know they're going to go down a path of wasting money on consultants or wasting money on box providers that they'll need to retreat from at some point. Yes. And I do believe that we've got to match the measure to the organisation, because the other side of this is, yes, there are organisations that will respond better to a numerical measure, whatever that may be.
Yes.
Because they will understand that. So there's no point, if you're in an organisation that's not very good at storytelling or understanding, starting to stress that side of it. I think, though, I would say there's a cocktail of measures, and I think the smart people involved in this would say there's 2 or 3 ways that we can look at this, so let's cut it a couple of ways and let's have that discussion and actually see what resonates with the internal company behind that.
Okay. And any other frustrations? So we've spoken about the cocktail. We've spoken a little bit about culture, actually, and the need to move to a cocktail of measures and the frustration with singular measures, and how possibly, if I may say, it maybe takes you away from what the actual experience is. Is there anything else, Michael, that perhaps on the technology side that is frustrating you or you'd like to raise?
Look, it's always that classic frustration, Stephen, that there's box sellers out there selling a box solution that you've got to be stupid to think that it's actually going to work. Because there isn't a single solution for everybody, because everyone's in a different state. You know, just as there's different styles and ways to win a football premiership, there's different ways and styles that companies need to adopt and win over a customer.
Yes.
And it's got to suit the fabric of what the customer actually needs and what the company is capable of actually getting into that customer's hands. You know, there's no point pretending that you are an Arsenal if you're a Southampton, as an example. There's no point in doing that. So you've really got to adapt. And the box sellers, the frustration there is they're actually hurting, at the end of the day, the customer. They're not going to help the customer, because I could just see it. We've seen it before. Give it 18 months, 24 months, it doesn't work. Someone loses their job. Another customer experience expert comes in. They choose a different company. And that's a huge frustration. I can see the money just getting wasted and getting flushed as we speak when companies think that that's actually the right solution. Now, I don't blame the box sellers. That's their job. That's actually their job. You go, okay, well, if my job is to sell a solution in a box, that's what I'm going to do. It's not their fault. But the companies need to take more due diligence around what they are trying to achieve and not be sold on this grand idea that customer experience is a measure, or it's a box, or it's any of those things. Okay. It's hard, you know that. It's hard. Yes. It's not easy, and it's not easy to actually position it in a way that there's so many variables, because we live in a world where people want certainty, and there isn't certainty around this.
Yes. So if not selling boxes, what should be the approach? Is it more of a consultative sale that you see, less about product sale? How do you see that sales funnel actually working in customer experience?
Yeah, definitely. And look, if I speak for a moment, about Ericsson for a moment, because Ericsson are a world leader in mobile technology and the technologies that we're talking about. Yes. We all know the world's rushing towards 5G. Yes. And 5G, we suddenly have all these labels around this, like the Internet of Things, and that description alone drives me nuts. It doesn't make any sense. So if I think of the money that companies such as Ericsson are devoting in R&D towards getting that technology up, I would say, for goodness sake, whatever you do, take a chunk of that R&D money, create a team of CX people in the R&D organization working side by side with the engineers, so that whatever you come out with, yes, it's technology at the forefront. It will be the best in the world. It will compete with the likes of Huawei and the others. But if you can add a layer in there because you've devoted time and attention to things that people are not thinking about, when we finally get to 5G in 3, 4, 5 years' time, you might just have a competitive advantage over the others because of the way you develop this technology and the variables behind it. And it's that type of thinking and that type of approach that ultimately I think will help companies. Yes. And it will help customers. Yeah. So, companies have to help themselves. They really do. They have to be open to it. So where there's creative, inventive, and open leadership in companies today, they will listen. Yes. You've then got to have the credibility to talk to them and understand them, not preach to them, but again, listen to understand what their issues are and what they're trying to accomplish, and then come back with, an interactive way of approaching it, which is really to go deeper than that. But don't just listen to sell your product. Your product may not be the best product for that company. There may be another product out there that you need to bring in. Technology is a fantastic enabler, but it is not a single solution to customer experience. And what I would say, given the background in technology, is there's obvious technology and then there's invisible technology. And they both play a different role. And what I mean by that, Stephen, is an obvious technology is a mobile phone or a DVD player or a scanner in a store, whatever the case may be. Then there's invisible technology, the technology we never see on a daily basis, but helps us in our lives on a daily basis. Software that changes traffic light sequences to improve the traffic flow. Yes. How many of us think that a pilot still flies a plane? Well, try turning off the invisible technology in that plane and see if that pilot can still fly the plane. It's reassuring for us to think that the pilot flies it, but of course, the pilot is now Plan B. Plan A is the autopilot, but Plan B is the pilot. The pilot is there as a safety measure, not the other way around. So there's the invisible technology. So technology is a great enabler. We know that, and it's accelerated what we're trying to do, and it's going to keep accelerating what we're trying to do with customers, because as we know, there's so much data coming our way. Some of that gets confusing, and I think, again, if we can strip it back a little bit, stop thinking about the technology for a moment, and again, truly try and understand, A, what is the company capable of? B, what is the customer truly looking for and what would enhance that experience? And then how are we going to reach out and understand that? Then you start to think a little bit differently than just worrying about the technology.
There's always quite a challenge, though, isn't it? I guess if you have that product mindset in terms of the first question after the how do you measure it is, and related to that is how do we monetize it and what's the ROI of customer experience? These are the first challenges. What would you say to somebody if you walked in the room and said, Michael, it's interesting what you say about customer experience. What's the ROI of customer experience and how are we going to monetize it in the next year? What would you say to them?
I would say you're not going to find that in the next 12 months.
Okay.
But tell me what it is you're looking for your customers to actually get from your brand. And the money will take care of itself ultimately. And this is where NPS hasn't helped. Because the linkage between NPS and then directly the health of the company financially, in my opinion, has been overstated for so long. Companies came to believe that if they increased and improved their NPS, then look at that, we're going to be successful and our financials are going to grow. Now, there's some evidence to say that, some of that is true, but it's not true in every case at all. And it is one of these things that you've got to come back to. You still have to offer a great product. You still have to offer a great experience behind it. You still have to drive towards improving that for the customer, whether that's improved loyalty or more share of wallet or whatever the case may be, whatever you're looking for. It's going to build into your business case. So what I would say, Stephen, is don't separate it from your business. Don't try and look at it differently from your business. Look at it as an inherent part of what you're trying to do, whether that's acquisition, whether it's retention, or whether it's an increased share of revenue, and then start moving ahead on that. I think no one has really found that pure way of measuring that return on investment at all. And it's no different than saying, well, show me the return on investment of training staff.
Yeah.
Prove it to me. Show me how much more revenue we get out of that or how we reduce our costs. Again, with the customer one, it's not a leap of faith, but I think you can draw a line between if we do this and if we do improve the experience overall for the customer, we will see an improvement in our financials. Am I willing to break that down to a dollar and cent right now? No, I'm not. But I do know if we go down this path, we have to trust in what we're doing, and the outcome will be the outcome.
And so much.
And again, if you do it better than your competitor, and it's consistent with your brand, then even drawing it back to common sense is going to tell you that you're going to be better positioned than your competitor.
Sure, but I guess the thing is so many brands are quite ill-defined, I guess. They just say in an annual report, trust us or love us or those sort of phrases. Do you find people have not really thought about their brand much? What do you think of, because everything seems to be coming back to, yes, culture, yes, how you measure, but also this what brand feel do you want to impart? Has that been well expressed in your opinion, or is there a lot of work to do there?
I think there's a lot of work to do, but brand really should be an indication of what the experience is going to be. If we are going to buy a high-end brand, then we expect the experience to be consistent with that generally. Of course we do. If we're buying at the other end of the scale, then we're kind of okay. It's a little bit like getting the budget airline compared to the full-service airline, yes. Which is why we get so upset with full-service airlines that we pay more for and we don't get good service, because we know our alternative choice would have been a cheaper flight and getting the same experience. This is where the CMO and customer experience and the CTO all really need to be aligned. So what does the brand actually stand for? Because if a company doesn't have a brand that stands for something, then really it cannot carry that forward into the future. If its experience is not consistent with the brand, then they're in trouble.
Yes.
And they would be in trouble ahead of when they start realizing that they are actually in trouble. And we've seen that time and again with companies that lose the brand promise.
Yes.
And I think, if you look at it from just the technology for a moment, I know we had a discussion a couple of years ago with a CTO in Europe, where the CTO in Europe felt entirely responsible for the NPS on the network experience. And the strong message back to him was, well, you're not. And of course they said, well, hang on, I am responsible for the network. I'm responsible for the performance. As I said, well, you're not responsible, though, for the NPS of that network. just as responsible is the marketing team.
Yes.
Because they're telling everybody that your network is the best in the country, and it's not. So when a customer experiences something different from what they've been promised, of course they're going to mark you down because their experience has been different from the expectation. So again, it's not just you operating a network. You could have a fantastic network. You could have a network that works every time. But if it's getting sold in a different way through marketing than you can provide to the customer, then you'll get marked down.
Yes.
So it has to be seen in context.
Exactly. Okay, Michael, these are fantastic thoughts of yours. What I'd like to end with is just people listening to that, if they want to get in touch with you, how can they? And if you can provide just a little, maybe a blog or contact details, that'd be fantastic.
Sure, Stephen. Look, they can find me on LinkedIn if they do need to get in contact with me. So they can do a search for Michael Young. I'm on LinkedIn. It's pretty easy to find. And I can give you the other details to that after the call.
Fantastic. Good. Well, Michael, much appreciate your time and look forward hopefully to working with you again on our endeavours in telcos and possibly even beyond. Thank you, Michael.
Thanks, Stephen. Thank you.